Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the Divine Vigilant. Tonight we have a special guest, Joseph Five Eagles Reyna. And Joseph is an author. He speaks and he is doing his part to basically get the message to the rest of the world of spirituality, the true story behind Jesus. He was a Marine. He aspired to be a Roman Catholic priest, or am I correct? Priest?
Exorcist.
Exorcist. He aspired to be an exorcist at a young age. He began having visions and seeing the invisible and perceiving things. He has ties to the Galactic Federation. He has a book here called Incredulous. I will be posting the links to the books and his info in the description. But he has a book called Incredulous, and he also has a published prequel movie trailer called Twilight's Last Gleaming: The Real Reason for the Resurrection. And he discusses things relating to quantum physics, Ascension, Planet X, just everything that us in this metaphysical realm have come to know so well, I guess. He has a very interesting story. He's worked tirelessly for years to piece together, all these breadcrumbs of information. He has some mind-blowing information on Jesus and the resurrection and the events, and some information that I think you guys will be pretty shocked to hear. That's not really mainstream, that even I hadn't heard of. He's got a lot of good things to say. So, with that, Joseph, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I don't know how to introduce myself. Ex-Marine, I guess that no, you never really use that. The research I did it for myself. I had no intentions of writing a book. But once I saw what this was and what was about to happen, I thought people should have at least some understanding of why things were taking place around the world, why the weather was so crazy, and why the government was spending money so fast that they'd never be able to repay it back, because they are not going to have to. But anyway, I decided I'd write it and get that information out before it was too late. That's pretty much it. Growing up, I wanted to do a lot of interesting things. I wanted to be a pilot. My hearing, I have trouble with high frequencies, so that was going to be a possibility. I was selected to be an officer and go to Annapolis, but I didn't want to put in the entire 11 years they required. So I just did my time. I skydived, rappelled, hang glide, scuba dived. I was a marksmanship instructor for the Marine Corps. It's one of my MOSS, military occupational specialties. Really good with the weapon. And I train people to be experts as well. If they weren't an expert, I felt I wasn't doing my job. But I really enjoyed that part of being in the Marine Corps. I do not suggest anyone go into the Marine Corps. I cautioned all my brothers not to go in there. Not that it's that bad. It was worse when I was in. A lot of suicides during the actual training. But they don't spend the money they're given by the government. They end up just giving it back. Where you go to the Navy and they've got awesome workout facilities, fantastic gyms and recreational areas, and their apartment complexes are really nice. And we're in open barracks still. But these back in high school, that equipment was better than what the Marines had. So if you join a force, join one that's going to give you something back. The Marines, you're extremely expendable. You're the first in and the last out. But I did enjoy doing that, and the Marines are worth their weight in gold in combat. But I kind of had a problem because I swore an oath to protect this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And there's this amount of domestic ones that just started coming out of the woodwork after 9/11. Once that happened, I just decided I had to get the information out. I think if 9/11 hadn't happened, I probably would not have written the book. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I basically, would you like to tell us how you got into this? What as far back as you can remember, what was the first experience that basically opened your eyes to all this, and what led you down this path?
I grew up in a haunted house. If you've ever seen the movie The Sixth Sense, it was a lot like that, except I wasn't seeing ghosts. I don't know that I've ever seen a ghost, a human ghost. It was more of in the demonic nature, the elementals, things that weren't human. And I would remember screaming and screaming, and my parents trying to get me to open my eyes, but I didn't want to open them because of what I had just seen. And then on one particular night, it was in the summertime. I had to have been less than 4 years old, and where I slept, was inside a crib with a mosquito net over me, and my brother was asleep. And I was sitting up, looking out the kitchen door, with my eyes wide open. And my mom saw me, and she knew I would see things, so she asked me what I was looking at. And I told her I wasn't sure. It was a deer, and it was a buck. It wasn't a very big buck. It looked perfectly proportional, just slightly smaller than some of the bigger bucks. In between his antlers was a crucifix of gold that was hovering in between the antlers, and the entire thing was glowing. The cross was glowing bright and everything else, but the entire deer was glowing. And my mom asked me what I was seeing. I said I didn't know. She said, "What's it look like?" "Well, it's got horns." She said, "Well, what's it doing?" And I took my stuff in my ears and went like that, because it was moving its ears. So it's doing like that. And so she kept the door closed and never saw what it was. I later found out it's called the Stag of the Hunt. It appeared to Saint Hubert. He's one of the saints of the Roman Catholic Church. It spoke to him, did not speak to me. But once that happened, the haunting stopped. And I just realized that there was more to this reality than we knew, and I just kind of always tried to pursue that. And it's kind of like in Beetlejuice, where the ghosts come out and try and scare you, but they were more excited and wanted to see the ghost again. I was kind of like that. It scared me a lot, but I also had to overcome that fear when your body just kind of tenses up. That moment when you're laying in bed and something kind of walks up to the door and your body freezes. You want to turn around, but your body's going, "No, you don't." That would happen. My body would just lock up, and I had to be able to push past that and get past the fear that locks up your body. I suppose in combat something similar would happen. Anyway, I've become an exorcist since then. I've healed with the powers of the Holy Spirit. And I had come across an individual who explained to me that Jesus had an identical twin brother. To this point, I'd never heard it. I had read about the legends of the twin. They thought Judah was his name. And this individual, it was what she said and how she said it, and my memories and information that I had about this event, because she said, "You walked with Christ, didn't you?" And I've had a lot of people say that to me. I kind of had that suspicion, but I never, told anyone. So that intrigued me about the twin brother. I started doing research, looking for the information. I found a tremendous amount of information, and down to the point where if Christ did not have, if this individual, Yeshua Bar Joseph, did not have an identical twin brother, then I can show you where his tomb is. It's in Kashmir. It's actually where the twin brother's at, with Mary, mother of Jesus. So he's on the cross, and at that point, one of the things he said, there were 7 individual things that are recorded. One of them is, "Mother, behold your son, son, behold your mother." And he was pointing out that this was the identical twin, and Mary was also his mother. I had heard that they were separated at birth from this individual who was a historian, and I was fascinated by one of the, I had spoken with several different journalists. I wanted them to read my book and try and tear it apart, because that's why I designed it the way I did. I took every single argument they had for someone called Christ Jesus, Yeshua, never having existed, having been a complete concoction based on the Savior gods. And so I took those arguments. I actually found more evidence, as much evidence as possible, on that subject. I built the case stronger than they could build it for there not being a Christ, and then I destroyed that information with evidence that I present, which is validatable. You can go back and check in history books. You can check your encyclopedia. You can check with NASA, and the information, it stands. And that kind of just started leading down a rabbit hole further and further. What I was really fascinated about was I had picked up a book when I was in the Marine Corps. I was stuck in Pendleton for a while, Camp Pendleton in California. It's a massive base, the largest one they have. And right outside Camp Pendleton was a tiny little seaside village. I think it's called Oceanside. And there was no vehicle back then. You just didn't get credit. In the military now, it's impossible not to get credit. They know you've got a permanent job, sign for anything, you'll get it. In that time, that wasn't possible. They knew you had a permanent job, they didn't care. So I couldn't get a car. I'd take the bus out there, and I'd just walk around Oceanside pretty much all day on Saturday and then go back. And that was it for the weekend. The city wasn't very big, but they had a used bookstore, and I went in there and I found a book called Our Mysterious Spaceship Moon. I thought of buying the book again because it got lost, and they want over $100 for an original copy of that book. The book basically went into a tremendous amount of data and information from both NASA and Russia, showing that the moon was an artificial concoction. It's not a planetoid, it's not a moon, it's not a natural celestial body, it's artificial. The rocks brought back they had 10 times more titanium on them than the most titanium-rich rocks on Earth, and this titanium was factory grade. Also, they found transparent aluminum on the moon. That's from all the glass cities that were shattered and destroyed, and a tremendous amount of wreckage on the moon from a war that took place 9,007 years ago. I call it the Nephilim Wars. And there was another battle before that, about 11,500 years ago, about the time Earth had the first major catastrophe on the planet, the flood, the Great Flood being the second one. So that always intrigued me. I knew there was no doubt that it had to be artificial. The sun pulls on it twice as hard as the Earth does. Earth cannot keep it in orbit. They're made out of two totally different dense materials. So the moon didn't break away from Earth and become Earth. There is a big section of Earth that's kind of missing there in the Pacific. They know that, so they just kind of say, well, it's the moon, and they both orbit around each other perfectly, and it's not possible. The moon is much older than the entire solar system by about 2 billion years. And there's a tremendous amount of anomalies on the moon. There's pillars on the moon, there's towers on the moon, there's domes on the moon, and there's bases on the moon on the backside. Also, the astronauts did not land when they said they landed. They did land, some did land. The photos they took are not possible, where if you've seen the sign for Target, the store like Walmart, Target, they've got a red ring on the outside, white ring in the center, towards the center, and then a red ring in the very center, a red circle, a dot really. If you place that over the moon in the same proportion, the white band is where they landed in those areas. Now, they don't ever mention having landed right in the middle, which is wherever they landed the first time. In the very center of the moon is a crater called Ukert. It's 16 kilometers wide. It's filled in to make a perfect triangle, and it always faces Earth directly center. That's one of the first places they landed. But having landed in the white area, there's no way you can possibly take the picture of Earth rising above the moon surface, which we've seen, because the Earth would always be overhead, since the moon always faces Earth from that direction. That really kind of sparked some questions in my mind when I saw that picture, because it was not taken from the locations they said they landed at. Also, under the ship, there's no crater. When that ship landed, just a little black area. On the Earth, they tested that lander 4 times only. They made 4 separate landings with the different devices because it was expensive. As it's landing, it was just pushing out debris in all directions. 3 of those times, it ended up pushing out a boulder that struck the landing gear and broke it off. So the thing tilted over on its side and exploded. Only made 1 safe landing and still had a massive crater under it. But there are no craters on the ones on the moon. Now, when they stepped on the moon, they left that pristine footprint. That's very strong evidence that they were on the moon, because there's 1 centimeter of dust collected on the surface of the entire moon, because it's only been in orbit about 12,000 years. And once I put all that together, I started getting really fascinated with the Anunnaki when I discovered what they were, because they describe Earth having broken away from the destruction of a world that was on this side of Jupiter. And what I found fascinating was they said the moon went with it 450,000 years ago. That was a lie, because I know for a fact the moon has not been in orbit that long. And I was also given a tremendous amount of information, shown visions, and other things as I was seeking on this path that proved the moon was not here that far back, and Earth was not here that far back. That was the most shocking of all, and that information just came in a few months ago.
What were these visions, if you don't mind?
Well, it's almost like what Paul says. I can't tell you if it was a dream or I was actually there. I purchased a special crystal called an Andara crystal. An Andara crystal is formed in volcanic glass, pours out of a section of molten rock, but it's actually a glass, and it's mixed with different minerals, so it has a different color. It could be a rose quartz color or a green, but it doesn't look like a quartz you'd be holding in your hand. It literally looks like a stained glass, a huge section of stained glass, perfectly colored through completely, almost like factory made. So this one that I selected was a cobalt blue color. And it's interesting that I selected that color because that's the color of what's called the blue apples. And I didn't know what importance the blue apples had there in the very beginning of my book, where Asmodeus, the demon that's named in the Reyna Chateau, Da Vinci. In Reyna Chateau, there's this demon. As you enter the church, it's crouched just below the little basin that has the water where you place the holy water you place on your head. And that demon is called Asmodeus. Asmodeus is the demon, the guardian of secrets and buried treasure. Anyway, Asmodeus I thought was rather fascinating because that demon was called upon by King Solomon to assist in the building of the temple. And that kind of shocked me. The ring that Solomon wore was very similar to the symbols of the Masonics that they use. Anyway, this ring was given to him by an angel named Uriel, and he was supposed to have dominion over anything he wanted. So he started calling all the demons up and asking them what they did, what their specialties were, and so Asmodeus was used to help them create secret chambers within the actual platform that the temple would have stood on. So what I discovered with this church was that it was linked to Christ in many, many ways, and Mary Magdalene and the blue apples. There's a coded parchment that was discovered, and the way to break the code is called the Knight's Tour. And it was made famous by Benjamin Franklin. It probably predates Benjamin Franklin, but if you take a chessboard and you put a knight on one corner, you can move that knight consistently in the way the knight moves, two forward, one to the side, and touch every single one of those squares only once, going all the way around. It's a puzzle. So if you did this pattern to this parchment of letters that were all perfectly squared out, you would get a message. And when the message was translated, one of the sections of the message spoke of two painters in particular. One was 10 years, the younger, and the other one was Poussin, Nicolas Poussin. And that also figured into what I found out about Christ having a twin brother. He was apparently privy to this knowledge, as was Leonardo da Vinci. So anyway, in there, it speaks of something called at midday blue apples, is all it says. And I didn't know what that was, and I didn't understand what that was for, it would have been maybe 20 years before I broke that code. The photon band that we're moving through right now, the Earth is moving through, consider that midday in relation to the central sun. So we're at midday, and blue apples at midday means that these blue apples can be harvested at midday. So what is the blue apple? A blue apple looks like a billiard ball. It's about the size of a billiard ball. Perfectly smooth and round like a crystal ball, but it's cobalt blue in color. And the cobalt blue has shimmering like ribbons of light, golden light moving through it. And they were used to operate the stargates. You've heard, if you ever watch Ancient Aliens, where the natives used to say these individuals walked up to this one little, just a little cutaway recess in the rock, doesn't go anywhere, but the person would stand there and then they'd be gone, they'd transport. You had to have one of these blue apples in your possession to do that. So how would a blue apple work? The blue apple works by modifying the field that's around us. At all times, there's something called the morphogenic field, and it links all living things on Earth. So it's theoretical. The morphogenic field basically says that if a thought comes into the field, many people are going to have the same thought. Some are going to act on it, some will not. And it's fascinating when you go look at the patents when they're filed. Several patents are filed on the same day. The telephones, there were like 3 different patents filed on the same day for the telephone. And that's just one of many. So sometimes you'll get an idea and you won't act on it, and you'll see it invented somewhere. You say, oh yeah, I thought of that. Well, this morphogenic field can be interfered with, and the blue apples do that. The blue apples have their own morphogenic field around them, and the morphogenic field they hold is the energy from the center of the galaxy. And I read that they come from the center of the galaxy. And I'm like, how do you get something out of the center of the galaxy? And the way you get something out of the center of the galaxy, you apparently need humans. And humans need to be on a planet that is moving through this photon band. And the humans have to be happy. They have to be content. They have to be thriving. And in their brains, they will start growing crystals. These crystals are magnetic in nature, and they will be energized when we get hit with a shock wave coming in from the central sun. We've got hit with several of these shock waves. However, many of us are not growing these crystals because of the fluoride in the water, Monsanto food they're feeding us, and the stress they're keeping us under. But the rich, the elite, who don't have this stress and are human and are within the photon band on the planet, are growing these crystals. You can Google it. They're called magnetic crystals in the brain, and they have to have them removed because it's a very high frequency. It's kind of like putting salt on a snail. These people are not very nice, and the energy really messes with them. So it's painful, and they have to be removed. This causes a harvest of these stones. They can get them out. Over in China, they have children that can take a coin out of a pillbox. Well, these children could also take the crystals out of your skull without having to break it open. And when you have these crystals together, for the longest time, I did not want to have this information in the second book. It was way too dangerous. They assured me there's nothing the reptilians could do about it now. You take the crystals. This is after they've been energized, charged by a shock wave from the center of the galaxy while they were still inside the human brain. And then you tone this music, and they start vibrating and moving, becoming liquid-like and forming into a sphere, just coming together until they form a certain size sphere. Won't get any bigger after that. And you would take these, and what I found fascinating, and the link back to Reyna Chateau, there's a window, a stained glass painting there, stained glass window, of Jesus raising Lazarus. And on one day of the year, January 17th, these 3 blue lights can be seen on the opposite wall, and they're called blue apples. No one knows why they're called blue apples, but that's what they call them, the blue apples. There's 3 of them, only on that day. The mayor of that village got so frustrated with all the publicity they got and all the tourism they got, he went ahead and covered that window up so they would never show that again. But when Jesus raised Lazarus, apparently he used something like a magic wand, like Potter. All the depictions in the catacombs show Jesus holding a wand, and at the end of the wand are 3 spheres, much like the clubs in a regular deck of playing cards. And the 3 spheres would have created a strong enough morphogenic field. So you would literally be within a higher dimension, let's say a 4th or 5th dimension, while still standing in the 3rd dimension. Whatever your thought was, that becomes reality in your immediate surroundings. So all you have to do is think for Lazarus to be brought back to life after having been dead for 4 days, and Lazarus would come back to life. Now, to give you some examples of how this works, the morphogenic field around the Earth, I don't want to call it evolution really, but it is a sort of evolution, an advancement in the species as they move along through time. These scientists in Switzerland, back in the 70s, decided to shield some seeds from the Earth's magnetic field. So they took corn seeds, they took oats and wheat, and several other barleys, and they created a very simple device. It's just a flat plate of metal with another flat plate of metal above it. It's got wires running to a simple device. You can download the patent on it because patents are only protected for 17 years. And all it does is create a charge, a field. Well, they put the seeds in there and germinate them. And from these seeds grew wheat that had been extinct. It's in the fossil record. We don't have it. The wheat was ready to harvest in 4 weeks, and it had more volume on the plant than ours do now. The seeds were smaller, but there were more of them. The corn was fascinating. The corn, if you have cornfields and you drive around them, you just check out the corn. They're all at about the same height. The corn husks are about the same height. There's two generally on each plant, two corn ears on the stalk down at the bottom, and then the rest is just leaves coming to the top. These had 12 on them. Every single leaf had corn on it. The corn was a little smaller, but more by volume, and the corn was ready to harvest in 4 weeks. Also, these plants that they developed this way, without any genetic manipulation, simply shielding them from the earth morphogenic field, these plants were not susceptible to the bugs that our other plants today are. And this company specialized in fertilizers and pest control, so this wasn't going in the right direction, and they wanted all research on it to stop. But before they did finish their research, they took some trout eggs from Europe, and they had the trout eggs inseminated and placed them inside the shield. And what they speculated must be happening is somehow every living thing draws energy from this field around us, gets information from it, so what it's supposed to build, how it's supposed to build it. These were shielded from that, so they didn't have access to that information. But the information is contained within the genome. It can contain books and books of volumes of information. So that information was contained within the genome. The genome went back in time, back into its memory to find out what it was supposed to build. And out of these trout eggs hatched a much larger fish. It looks like a salmon, but it's a trout. And it's called a hook-nosed trout. They've been extinct for 150 years. You can find this information by Googling the Primordial Code. It's a book that was written by the sons of these scientists, and they replicated the device, the invention. And these new seeds would pretty much feed the world with a very natural, very wholesome type food. But that's not the direction Monsanto's taking it. So few people have ever heard of these experiments. So this is just, I'm telling you this so that you start to realize that there is something out there, this morphogenic field, controls everything, and somehow these blue apples interfere with this morphogenic field.
Now,
Anyway, go ahead.
are these blue apples related at all to the apple story in the Bible with Adam and Eve?
No. Actually, do you recall the story where Moses sent in 12 spies into Canaan? Before they entered the land, they went in groups of two, and Jacob and Joshua and Caleb came back with what was called, I guess, grapes. What is that called when you have a cluster of grapes? They were huge. They were almost touching the ground. They could barely hold it between them on a pole. Do you recall any of that?
Vaguely. The grapevine, I guess.
Yeah, these were not grapes. They stole them from the Nephilim. These were the blue apples. And so they eventually came down through Mary Magdalene, who had 3 of them. She was a princess of the house of Benjamin. And so she was in charge of those. She was like a priestess. And Jesus accessed the power of these through her. She allowed him to use them. But the powers Jesus did, the things he didn't need these for that. It's just that for this particular thing that he did need them.
And when we had spoken initially, you had spoke of the connection with Jesus and Judah, and how they were thought to be twins. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, again, Rennes-le-Chateau. Behind the altar of Rennes-le-Chateau are 2 statues, one of Joseph and one of Mary. You see this in a lot of Catholic churches, but only one of them is holding the Christ child. In Rennes-le-Chateau, each is holding a Christ child. Also, the disciples, one of them is named Thomas. That is not a name. Historians have known this forever. Thomas is a word. It means twin. And sometimes it's called Didymus. Thomas called Didymus. And that's in the book of John, Gospel of John. And Didymus is the Greek equivalent of twin. So the twin was one of the disciples. And if you look at the painting of the Da Vinci, the Last Supper, Leonardo da Vinci's painting, on the left side of Jesus is a guy wearing green, and looks exactly like Jesus, and that's where Judas would have been sitting. To his right is the individual they say is Mary. Well, there's another individual in that painting who doesn't have a beard. He's off to the left side. But if you take that face of Mary, cut it out, and superimpose it over the Madonna of the Rocks, it's the exact same face. It's a woman's face. And when Da Vinci painted this, he wanted to show that one of the disciples had been killed, and the title twin, Thomas, was split away from Judah. Judah had to be destroyed. He obviously was a betrayer now. And Thomas would take all the good efforts that he did. He'd become the disciple that was missing, which was actually Stephen. And this disciple is painted in the painting. There's a guy next to Mary Magdalene on the left. He's wearing kind of a bluish gray outfit, old man. And he's got kind of like an Egyptian stance. He's got an arm out like this, and he's got his other arm back here. The thing is that the way the arm is, the knife comes out like that. You have to break the wrist, twist it backwards, and he has a different colored sleeve. He's wearing brown. People would automatically jump to, well, that's a mistake. There would have to be a mistake. Da Vinci made a mistake. Da Vinci was famous for not making that mistake. And the other paintings that show who he was is in the paintings of Nicolas Poussin. Very distinct, and he identifies him as being Judas. Also, ancient writings that speak of Judas being called Thomas. And then when you actually start looking at the layout, what happens when they show up, when Thomas, the doubting Thomas, shows up, and why Judas was gone for so long, all the pieces fall into place. And the other thing that really fascinated me was that Jesus did not come to save any sinners. He did not come to basically save us from sin, be the only Son of God, Redeemer of the world. That's what the Savior gods were. And these were thousands of years before Jesus. I had never heard of them. They're called the Savior gods. They were all born of virgin mothers. Their fathers were God, the God of whatever religion they were worshiping, because they all come from different cultures. Persia has one. The Greeks have one. They have Dionysus. And Dionysus changed water to wine at weddings so often he's considered the god of wine. He rode an ass, a donkey, into the city of Athens for his coronation. He was betrayed, he was crucified, and he resurrected. So did Mithra, so did Horus. All of these individuals were crucified and resurrected. No, they were all innocent. They were the innocent lambs led to slaughter. What's different about Jesus is he wasn't innocent. He was guilty. And the Holy Spirit kept telling me to search for that information that Jesus was guilty, and I could not find it. It was right there. I just didn't understand the culture, so I kept missing it. But I finally did find it, and once I did, everything just fell into place. And the other thing, the thing that drew me to the resurrection and the crucifixion.
Second. What was he guilty of?
I can't tell you that. I drew in the book for you. But he was guilty of sedition. And sedition, you're hearing it, you're actually seeing it on headlines. Sedition against President Trump. When someone says assassinate the president, that's sedition. Someone says, what's that word? Impeach him, get him out of there, that's sedition. So you're basically saying something against the person in charge of that country, and it's called sedition. So you're calling for civil war, that's sedition. And Obama, they've labeled him having been guilty of sedition late, and he has been. Sedition is simply going against the leader. In this case, it was Tiberius. So the arrest was a Roman arrest, not a Jewish arrest. And it's really fascinating what he was guilty of. But I can lead you to it. There's a Bible that was put out a while back. There's a book called the Five Gospels. And it was put together by, I think it was something like 72 historians. They were theologians. And these individuals weren't necessarily spiritual, but they were very well versed in Scripture. And they all sat in these rooms, and they read every single verse from every single gospel, from some of the oldest manuscripts they had. And then they voted on each single verse. And they voted with colored beads. They had a black bead, they had a gray bead, they had a pink bead, and they had a red bead. And I think they had a white bead as well. But if the verse was read out to the group, and they all thought this is definitely something Jesus said, Doesn't show up anywhere else in history. He must have been the originator of it. They would vote with the red bead. Now, if this was something Jesus said, but so did Buddha, so did Socrates, then they might vote with a pink bead. And if they were certain this was not anything Jesus said, there's probably something they added in there later, they voted with a black bead. And this is how the book's laid out. When you open up these Gospels, there's 5 Gospels in there, the original 4 that we're familiar with, and the Gospel of Thomas, who is Judas. Anyway, the Gospel of Thomas is added in there at the very end. And so they've got every single verse in there is colored, just like your red lettered edition King James. All the major stuff Jesus would have said was in red. Stuff they were pretty sure he said, but weren't certain. He wasn't the originator of it. Those were in pink. The others are just regular black. And if they think he did not say it, then it's in bold black. So there is one gospel there, the Gospel of Mark. In that entire gospel, they only voted on one passage in that gospel, one sentence in that entire gospel that reads in bold red. That's what he was arrested for.
Interesting. So, what was this, going back to the moon, what was this connection with the moon on the day of Jesus' death?
On the day Jesus died, which was not Good Friday, by the way, we're coming up to Good Friday right now, the last occurred on a Tuesday, and he died on a Wednesday, and it was not the year 33, it was the year 31. You can Wikipedia, you can Google it. Everyone's under the understanding it had to have been the year 31. The records are missing from Rome for the year 31. But in that year, the moon, on the day of the Passover, which is a full moon, it's scheduled for a full moon day. On that day, the moon reversed direction as it was rising in the sky. It left the area of Asia, came back around the Earth, and was seen to move in front of the sun, creating the eclipse that Luke speaks of. So this eclipse caused a massive earthquake because the moon is not supposed to be an eclipse. It's supposed to be a full moon night. The moon's on the wrong side of the planet. And you will find it in your Bibles. If you go in your Bibles and look for the word eclipse, you probably won't find it. They're taking it out. It's kind of embarrassing to have an eclipse on a night that everybody knows has to be a full moon. So they've removed it. But the moon was said, and it was reported by historians that this happened, and a lot of these documents were hunted down and destroyed. But there are some paintings that show both the moon and the sun in the sky over the crucifixion. And people don't pay any attention to it. You know, we see that all the time, the moon and the sun. The problem is, on a night of a full moon, you would not see the moon in the sky, next to the sun, near the sun, anywhere in the sky during the daytime. So, having known that the moon was artificial, having known it was piloted into position, I didn't know by who yet at the time, and then having discovered these Anunnaki individuals and planet Nibiru, and having tied them later to the moon, they somehow had something to do with the piloting. And Jesus kept saying that the time was growing near, he had to do it on that day. Whatever he had to do, it had to happen on that day. He couldn't postpone any longer, he had to drink from the cup. And this one physicist who did a tremendous amount of research on that work, he found out that the moon, the earth, and the sun were in the most perfect position they were going to be in for years that would cause the minimum amount of damage if the moon was taken out of orbit. And it caused horrific earthquakes that were recorded and documented. And the arguments about the moon not having been in a position to create an eclipse was argued as late as 240 years after the crucifixion by historians. And individuals pointed to the records of Rome. They said, go back, it's in the records of Rome. Pilate wrote about it. He put out his exacta, the record for that year. It's mentioned there, and it was mentioned by Rome because Rome had a celebration on that day called Sol Invictus, the invincible sun, their greatest god. And so here you have a moon moving in the way of their invincible sun, blocking it for 3.5 hours. Eclipses don't last. I've seen eclipses, they only last 12 minutes. Eight's about the usual. But 3.5 hours, that's not going to happen. But it was there. It was 3.5 hours. It was much closer to Earth. It was much bigger and blocked a much larger area on that day, according to the records. And then it went back around and created another eclipse, a red one at night. And this gets into the prophecy of Joel. When Pentecost comes around, that's 50 days after the crucifixion, Penta being 50, the Greek word 50. Pentecost, Peter addresses the crowd, and he gives them the verse from Joel. He said, according to Scripture, the sun would go dark at noon, the moon will be turned to blood, And that was one of the final signs of the Messiah. So they understood, these Jews who were well versed in Scripture understood that what they had seen 50 days earlier was one of the signs from heaven, indicating this individual was the Messiah they'd been waiting for. And that's why 3,000, they didn't convert from Christians. They just understood he was the Messiah and they accepted that. Because there was no such thing as Christians back then. They were still Jews, just some people believed he was the Messiah and some did. And I thought that was fascinating. But once I got into the whole Anunnaki thing, everything just kind of fell into place, because there is no mention of a god in Scripture. In the Old Testament, they're called Elohim, and the Elohim is not the word God. The Elohim basically means an astronaut, someone who came from the cosmos down to Earth. There were two types of these. They were the benevolent and the malevolent. The malevolent, let's just call them reptilians.
I don't mean to. Let me stop you real quick before we move on to that. Who do you think Jesus was, and what was his purpose?
Well, he was who he claimed to be. Prophecy said there would be an anointed individual from the line of David to rule as king. But being Christians, most of us, or having been raised in some type of church, we're told that there was one Messiah they were waiting for. That is not true. That has never been true. Whenever you start reading the history of the Jews, and the Jews have selected messiahs, they said they voted on it. This guy must be the Messiah we're waiting for. And it was, they actually conducted revolts, and they were disastrous. But they never selected one person. There were always two. There was the Messiah, who is from the line of David. He is the king. And there's the Messiah. And the Messiah just means anointed. The Messiah who's of the line of the priest, which would be either Aaron or Levi. And there's always two. In Revelation, they changed that around and it made it look like he's the false prophet. So you've got the beast and the false prophet. The beast being Antichrist, the one in the place of Christ, and the false prophet, well, he's just a false prophet. But that's not what they're waiting for. They were waiting for two individuals. One would come in the spirit of Elijah, and that was John the Baptist, and he would be a prophet. So when Jesus, at the very end of the Gospels, here where the priests are asking him all kinds of questions, and he says, answer me this and I will tell you, was John the Baptist a prophet? Well, they can say yes, because if John the Baptist was a prophet, that means the Messiah was alive and well, and he was ready to take his place. So then they couldn't tell him. They weren't going to say yes. This individual, there's a lot of evidence that shows Jesus could not have existed. One of the strongest ones is Nazarene, the city of Nazarene. In the city of Nazarene, I explained in the book, this guy, it's a novel, it's written as a novel, kind of like The Matrix sort of thing, to keep you entertained and show you these, I guess, story within a story. So this guy brings all his researchers together. He uses his remote viewing and special abilities as an exorcist for locating the sunken Spanish galleons throughout the Mediterranean. Not the Mediterranean, the Caribbean. And he has researchers in all the libraries, because I've done treasure hunting, and it's a big part of treasure hunting. You need to find the wreck on paper before you ever go looking for it in the water. So this is what these guys do, and they can get lost in libraries. They love being in libraries. So he brings them all together, calls for them to be brought back together in a floating city that they have, and he funds himself by recovering the gold and the gems and jewels from these ships. So when they come together, they're all arguing that they have very important missions they're on and projects. And they all want to go back to them. And he says, fine, just prove to me very quickly they were wasting our time. Let's start with Nazareth. According to the records, there was no Nazareth. Doesn't show up on any records. Doesn't show up anywhere. So could you please find it for me? And they start searching for it. And it's not in any of the ancient Roman maps. It's not in any of the Greek maps. When Josephus, who wrote the history of the Jews, when he speaks and names 80 different provinces, small villages within Galilee, Nazareth is not among them. Nazareth doesn't show up for 400 years after the crucifixion. That's when Helena sent people into the Holy Land to find these, where Jesus was crucified, where he was buried, the city of Nazareth, on and on, things like that. So if she sends you in there to find it, you better find it. And so they just named the location Nazareth. This has to be Nazareth, they called it. Okay, Nazareth was not a location. Nazareth is a word, and it translates into heretic. So when they call Jesus Yeshua the Nazarene, they're calling him the heretic, is what they're calling him. And if you want evidence to back this up, there's a section in Paul in Acts where Paul is called the leader of the heretics, and sometimes in some versions of the Bibles it's translated the leader of the Nazarenes. They could not have all been from Nazareth. Most of them were Gentiles. So the word Nazareth, Nazarene, means heretic, and there was no city of Nazareth. So the people who are atheists point to that. Oh, there was no Jesus because there was no Nazareth. Well, yeah, there was no Nazareth because it's the word. It doesn't mean the name of the city, but we don't understand any of this. We don't understand a lot about what the Jews did, why they did what they did, what their customs were like. I didn't know that Passovers were held on full moons. All the holy days are aligned to full moons. Their calendars are aligned to the new moons. It wouldn't make sense back then. You don't have lighting, a whole lot of street lighting, so why not host it on a full moon? And that's why they just had the 4 tetrarch moons, and they all fell on the 4 of the major holidays of Israel. Well, that's no accident. They're aligned to the full moons. So that was
interestingly enough, the 3rd blood moon was on my birthday, Easter last year. I just thought we were talking about that yesterday, but yeah. So moving into what you were saying about with the Nephilim, what is the connection with the Nephilim and all this with Jesus and everything that took place?
Okay, well, most of us are waiting for what they're calling the Ascension, and Jesus basically came to demonstrate that an ascension is possible. I'll get into that later. The Nephilim. I just did an entire show on the Nephilim. It went 3 hours. The Nephilim, I believe it's Steve Quayle and Hunt. Is that the name of the other individual? Anyway, they portray the Nephilim as evil, demonic, trying to subvert or pollute the perfect seed of Adam, and thereby undo the work of God. And I don't know where they get that from. I really don't. I know the giants were really bad individuals that did some horrific things, but not all giants were Nephilim, although all Nephilim were giants. Now, there was a part in our history where we were not only modified by the Anunnaki to be their workers and appear like them. We have the long hair, and we have the smooth skin, where whatever ape man they changed us from could have been like a Sasquatch, would have been covered in hair. And Enki, when he holds a child in these clay tablets, he says, hairy like the wild one he was not, that his hair was black, because their hair is kind of a whitish color, and their skin's kind of bluish. And this child's skin was more like the color of the clay of Africa, kind of a reddish brown. So it's fascinating how he's describing this little. They finally made one that was working. Everything was working on it, and he said, "We shall call him the Adamu." Adamu means worker, and then he says, "We must make copies from this one." So the Anunnaki, using their DNA, which is some of the most ancient and royal bloodlines in the universe, modified an existing being on the planet, made him look in their image, put their seal upon, their mark upon him. After the wars that took place about 11,500 years ago during a reptilian invasion of our system, the reptilians were in charge, and the reptilians modified us further. And I don't know if it's something to do with the modification they made, but when they were defeated and humans were back on Earth free, and some of them mated with human female, incredibly beautiful compared to their body styles. And the children born to these women, something in their genetics did not stop the growth. They just kept growing up to 35 feet. This can be demonstrated in our own experimentation, where people take 2 different species and put them together. If you take a lion, mix it with a female tiger, you'll get something called a liger. And a liger is much bigger than its parents. It grows really big, over 10 feet long, and 1,000 pounds of tiger there, the lion combination. But if you do the opposite, you take a male tiger and a female lion, the female lion's genetics somehow modify the growth of that next offspring, so they're similar in size. Now, these are almost all male. When you take a donkey and a horse, and a male donkey, a female horse, and put them together, you get a mule. And the mule will almost always be male, and it will not be fertile. It will not be able to get a horse pregnant or a donkey pregnant or any mule pregnant. There's only been a few female males that were ever grown, and those were also not able to bear offspring because they're hybrids. And just looking at that evidence, I don't understand how Steve Quayle comes out and says, well, look, they're going to mate with humans and pollute the population. Well, that's not possible. Just simple scientific knowledge of the hybrid shows that's not possible. But these beings were quite big and quite powerful. And some of the things L.A. Marzulli goes into, he's got something about the Nephilim that was located in Afghanistan, a giant. And he calls them...
Real quick, that's interesting what you're saying about the hybrids, because I'm sure you're familiar with the Rh negative bloodline, and my wife happens to be Rh negative, and I know that the women that are Rh negative, if they don't, if they're not with somebody who is Rh negative as well, they need a special shot in order to conceive.
In the Bible.
That just with this hybrid thing, that's just striking, because that's pretty powerful evidence. What can you tell us about that?
I can tell you that if you're telling someone what I'm telling you right now, and they're not Rh negative, 10 years ago they would have become violent. Nowadays, their eyes glaze over, and they got that kind of lights are on nobody's home look in their face, but they're not violent. But someone who is Rh negative understands what we're talking about, and it resonates with them. It's that powerful, the distinction between the hybrids and the human, the earthlings.
Yeah, and come to think of it, my mother's Rh negative too. But yeah, that's pretty interesting. I just, when you were talking about how they just don't mix, that's the first thing that popped in my mind. But okay, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
So L.A. Marzulli speaks of this Delta unit that was, they were, what do you call them, ops, black ops, or whatever. They were sent on a patrol. They didn't come back, so they sent another patrol out there to see if they could find them. And they came across a location where they saw equipment that was broken and smashed, no bodies, there was blood everywhere. And then this huge 18-foot plus being came out, and he's making all these guttural noises. And one thing they say is he moved very fast, way faster than they thought it was possible for this thing to move. And he took like a lance, but it wasn't pointed, so it's more a pike. That's what L.A. Marzulli calls it, a pike. And the spear point of this thing is about 1 meter in length, and it's made out of bronze. And it's blunt, like a railroad spike. A railroad spike would be sharp compared to how blunt this thing is. It's almost like a cucumber on the end, or a carrot stick. It's not sharp at all, but it's heavy. And the shaft that it's attached to is always about 8 feet long and incredibly thick, almost 4 inches round. So there's no way a human, one of us, is going to take it and be able to really defend themselves or do damage with this thing other than hit somebody over the head with it. Well, these things can take you, just harpoon you, just shish kebab you, and then lift you into the air. And that's exactly what happened to one of the soldiers. This thing jumped down, speared him through the armor that he's wearing, the bulletproof armor, just from one side to the other, and lifted him up in the air. And then they started shooting at his face, and he was killed. Took 2 helicopters to get him out of there, and they flew him out in a C-130, the body. Now, Chief Joseph in the Americas once stated that these giants would, they could spear 3 braves with the same lance, raise them up into the air, bite the head off of them, and start sucking the blood, and that they were very difficult to fight. And when the Indians came up to you and said how, and they held up their hand with 5 fingers, that was to show they were not one of these giants. The giants had 6 fingers.
Interesting.
They held their hand up. So these Nephilim, the giants were really quite cruel. Just if you have any understanding of the concept that there are humans without souls, that there are earthlings, let's call them earthlings, without souls. The giants had no souls. They were just animated life forms like a gorilla. But the humans, and by soul I don't mean a living consciousness, I mean the spark of Creator, an essence of Creator, a piece of God, which we all have. And we're called containers for that reason by the grace, because we contain this particular aspect within us. Anyway, the Nephilim did have the soul. And what's fascinating about that is that only those born of the daughters of Adam and Eve had the soul. And that goes for humans as well. So when they're asking Jesus, are you the Son of Man? are you a son of man? Are you the son of man? That means, are you descended from Adam and Eve? And in the Bible, they try and really push the Son of Man, saying that it means the only Son of God. That's not what it means. It means you're descended from Adam and Eve. This particular title is also given to Enoch in the book of Enoch when they finally did find the book. And the title is also given to Joel. It's been removed from your Bibles, or edited. And it was given to Daniel as well, Son of Man, meaning they were descendants of Adam and Eve. So anyway, these Nephilim, however, were incredibly intelligent and had all the power, the brute force of these giants. And the giants, if you've ever seen, I'm sure everyone who's listening has seen the movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe. The beginning of the movie, when the Romans were about to fight the hordes of German whatever they are, Vikings, they have these massive crossbows, really, really big. And you can see them lifting the shaft and putting it under. That's a 30-pound bolt. And in the movie, they're shooting them into these people, and you see one scene where two guys go flying backwards on the same arrow. I'm sure they would do that. That's not what they were designed for. These crossbows were designed to fight these giants. And what they had to do is lower them into an area where they had cliffs surrounding the area, and the crossbows were on top. They'd fire the crossbows down into them because the only thing that they had that could pierce their armor, they had bronze armor, and that's how they would kill them. So that's a nice little piece of history there. That was told to me by Brooks Agnew, another author and a very credible inventor. So I did not know that about the Romans. I know they had fought a huge giant snake using these weapons, but I really didn't understand why they had to have such a big weapon, such a big crossbow. And now I know. So the Nephilim, when the Earth was attacked by the Reptilians about 11,500 years ago, the Nephilim are the only warriors that have ever really given them a reason to pause, because they sort of handed their ass back to them. And the Reptilians weren't ready for this. Now, the Anunnaki did get beat and got beat bad. They left the area surrounding Planet X because they orbited on their world, Nibiru, which is an artificial Death Star type of vehicle. But the Reptilians feared giants at that point and tried to kill them and hunted them down, so the giants kind of went to hiding. The ones that were left on Earth, they didn't know they were not Nephilim, they were giants. And the Nephilim started putting together.
So there's a difference. There was a race of giants separate to the Nephilim, and the Nephilim were the sons of the Anunnaki and man, or
all the sons of the Anunnaki. Any giant would have to be the son of an Anunnaki male with a human female. Yeah, any giant.
Well, I didn't know if you were saying there was a difference, if there was a different set of giants and the Nephilim, or if they were the same, the way that you had phrased it. But, okay.
They were giants, but the Nephilim were intelligent. They'd be like the difference between a knight and a street foot. Someone who's like got chivalry, and someone who just stab you in the back. You understand?
Yep.
Okay, so they basically had a soul, they had a conscience, where the giants didn't. The Nephilim, which were giants, had that spark of creator. And they were also more intelligent, far more intelligent. And they built these new weapons called the Velexi in the Sanskrit. And the Velexi were a beam-type weapon that could launch a thunderbolt, if you've ever looked into the Thunderbolts project. That damage on the moon, those giant craters that are there, that was caused by an electrical discharge, a gigantic thunderbolt. And they've duplicated this in laboratories. So you've got these massive craters on the moon. They're 180 miles across, but they're not craters. They're convex. They're dome. That's not a crater. A crater is a hole. These things are hit. They've got a little tiny ridge in the middle, little point, and then they're clean swept from the center all the way to the outside with a sharp edge on them on the outside. The sharp edge. These cliffs are all about 4 kilometers deep. The entire section is just swept out 4 kilometers deep, and then on the outer ring of the crater, you've got another tiny little ring on the actual edge of it, and you can see this, and that was duplicated in the experiments of the Thunderbolts as well. And that's what these weapons did. They were harmonically tuned to the toroidal field of the ships of the Reptilians. It was like a giant bug zapper. The Reptilians couldn't get anywhere near it, and they're like hornets or ants. You piss them off, they'll attack you. So it was their undoing when these weapons were unleashed on them. But these weapons, these ships, there were 50 of them. And the fleet, I call it the Tartarus fleet, only because of a comment from the Reptilians that this fleet came from the farthest reaches of hell. And the farthest reaches of hell, those lands were called Tartarus. So I call it the Tartarus fleet. And these 50 ships, the first one they designed was 16 miles in length. You have to understand the hangars in this ship that they have. Imagine if the Earth was a battle star, a hollowed out sphere made from an alloy. Well, theirs is 4 times larger than Earth. So you can kind of imagine the size of the cargo base they would have in there. And the last ship they built was 52 miles. There were 2 of those. And these things sustained the voltage for so long it was feared it would rip through the time continuum. But those are some of the larger craters you see on the moon from Earth, so the damage that they left. Anyway, the Nephilim, when they attacked, they were piloting. There were 50 main captains piloting these ships. And that's why they were called in Genesis 6:4 at the very end. Now, at the beginning of Genesis 6:4, at this time were the Nephilim. It says they were descendants of the daughters of Adam and Eve. Again, very important. They have to be from that bloodline. It says these were the heroes of old, the men of renown. The Bible says a lot of bad things about men, and here it's talking of these Nephilim being heroes and men of renown. Well, it's the Nephilim, not the giants, that were the heroes, because they saved humanity. They freed them from the clutches of the Reptilians, subdued the Reptilians, and basically enslaved them on the planet. They would have killed all the Reptilians except they were ordered to stand down. And the humans they praised these guys' feats. You know, they were the heroes. And it's interesting that in Greek mythology and in Roman mythology, heroes were always demigods. Heroes always had a father who was not human. Any connotation of hero means you are one of the, you have to be one of these demigods. And I guess the Nephilim would be considered demigods if you consider these individuals gods with a small g.
It's also interesting that they say the heroes of old, men of renown, because that would insinuate that, you know, Genesis chapter 6 is obviously the very beginning of the story. So if they're saying the heroes of old, then this, you know, leads you to believe that it's older than Genesis. You know, the history is further back, you know.
Well, there's in the book, in the back section of the book here, it describes that what took place on the elements, the times of the flood and all that, they go back 12,000 years, not 4,000 years. Anyway, this is the cover of the book. It says Incredulous. This seal right here, that is the seal that would have been on the tomb of Jesus Christ. It's just basically red clay, and it's got a seal of Tiberius Caesar on it with a string. And if that string is broken, then all Rome would hunt you down and crucify you. And nobody was hunted down and crucified when that tomb was broken, when that Golgotha was rolled back, because it was the angels who broke it, not men. And that was another smoking gun to the resurrection. There should have been a tremendous amount of crucifixions after that in retaliation by Rome. So these heroes, this did not go over well with Enlil. Are your group, the ones who follow you, are they familiar with the lineage of the Anunnaki? There's Anu, he is the Lord of the Elohim. And then he's got 3 sons from 3 different wives. He's got Enlil, he's got Enki, and he has a daughter.
Simyaza.
In her son. What's that?
Simyaza.
Yes. Well, they are, so they're a little bit familiar with it. Well, Enki had originally been put in charge of Earth when he found the gold. Enki is not his name. His name is Ea. It's the letter E and the letter A. Ea. Now, Enki means Lord of the Earth. So Enki, Lord of the Earth. Ki is the name of Earth. And Enki means Lord of the Earth. So that's a title that he actually has. And Enlil was put in charge of the Earth, even though Enki was the one who did all the great things on the Earth, only because Enlil was more human. He was more pure human. His mother is a human. And so the some sort of council, much like the Federation, Council of Galactic Council, Galactic Federation, had him appointed to be in charge of what was taking place on Earth in this time. And he did not like the Nephilim. He didn't like the humans. He thought the humans were an abomination because they took his DNA and stuck it in his chattering chimp. And you can't shut these things up now, and they breed like rabbits. So he was not too happy with that. And then you've got the Nephilim, and they're looking up to the Nephilim and just praising them. And Enlil didn't like that at all, so he was not very happy with the Nephilim. He wanted them destroyed, basically. He's always undermining them. So the Nephilim were catching it from both ends. They just they were heroes, and yet they weren't really given the credit they should have been.
So the Nephilim and Enki and Enlil, these are two separate groups or races that are coexisting on Earth at the same time?
No, Enlil, Enki, and her sect, they're all, let's call them Anunnaki. They're human, the most ancient form of human, and we'll call the Nephilim Earthlings. They're Earthlings, but they're also demigods, half Earthling, half Anunnaki.
Okay, so the Anunnaki and the Nephilim were here at the same time then?
Oh, yeah. Well, the Nephilim were born from the Anunnaki.
Okay.
And also, Enki's mother is a dragon princess. I mean, actually, she's a dragon queen. So he's actually part reptilian. And his wife is a serpent princess. So his son, Marduk, is even slightly more reptilian. And he actually sided with the reptilians a few times. And then Ninhursag, she's her mother is one of the Lionids.
Well, that's what I was trying to get at. Who the reptilians are they? That's what I meant. The reptilians are the reptilians a part of the Anunnaki or the
Well, yes and no. They're the Draconians. It's like the Nazis. You come to Earth, humans have to be Nazis. You can't trust them. Is that true or not?
There's both sides of the coin.
Right. You've got these bad individuals who call themselves the Nazis, and they have an agenda to carry out. They think they're better than everyone else. Well, consider them the reptilians, the Draco reptilians. The Draco reptilians believe that their DNA is so pure and so perfect, and they are the ones that are supposed to run the whole world, the whole galaxy, actually. And whatever world they come upon, they're supposed to conquer it and control it and lead it and rule it and run it. And humans are used for food, entertainment, and super soldiers to fight your wars with.
The thing I was trying to clarify is my perception of what the books tell us, and ancient aliens and everything, and these different carvings and stuff, is they portray the Anunnaki as having reptilian features in a lot of the drawings and stuff, and we have a humanoid appearance. So where is it that this appearance came from, and what is it?
For a time, we were ruled by the reptilians. After the 12,500 years when that war took place and the reptilians won, they modified humans still further, and they were the ones in charge. And you had to worship them. And the way you worshiped them was when you had your firstborn, you had to present it to them. You had to place it into a massive bronze bowl with a huge furnace underneath it. You had to place your baby in there and burn it alive for them, your firstborn. In the Bible, it says, all who break the womb shall be passed through the fire, whether they're human or animal. So all the firstborn animal had to be put into this huge roasting dome dish. It's like a wok, a Chinese wok, I guess, Japanese wok. And they found these near Göbekli Tepe. There's another city near there. And in that section, they found so much human sacrifice going on. It was unreal. And they're kind of keeping it quiet because they saw that they were burning children on these bronze vats. Now, let's go back to the Bible real quick. Do you recall, there's a story there of 3 young men who refused to bow to an idol. I don't know if it was a golden calf or whatever the hell it was, a golden lamb. And the king ordered them to bow to this idol. And these 3 men would not. Abingadoo, those guys. So the king orders them to be thrown into the furnace. And he says, make it 3 times hotter than required to roast human flesh. Now, how does he know the temperature to roast human flesh? Because that's what these infernal contraptions were for. David Icke goes into the very beginning of, I think it's called Wisdom Teachings. He shows these statues of Moloch. And it's a cow-looking thing with a pig-like nose and a ring through its nose. It's got a human body, and is sitting down. And on his lap is this huge bronze bowl, and underneath his legs and underneath the seat is the furnace, and this bronze bowl is just burning, sort of sautéing, cooking, whatever. And the babies were placed in there, the newborn boys. The way it reads, it sounds like all the girls as well, but I'm familiar with them definitely putting the boys in there. And the reptilians, they're telepathic. So as this child is dying, not only do they feed off its fear and its torment and what it's going through, they're also feeding off its light. They're sucking it in like vampires.
Is that related to what's going on with the whole Pizzagate and the worship of Moloch today? Is that just a continuation of basically?
Yeah.
So, I'm just not clear on where we come from. I mean, if we were made in the image of God, I mean, if that's speaking through our soul and the. Go ahead.
You just God, but that comes from the King James Bible. Let's go further back to the Hebrew writings, where it came from originally, and the Hebrew writings stem from the Sumerian writings. But let's just stay with the Hebrew. The Hebrew never used the word God. They used the word Elohim. You were made in the image of the Elohim. And who were the Elohim? The astronauts who left the cosmos, came down to Earth.
Right.
Yes.
So if they were reptilian in appearance, then how did we get our shape?
Because the reptilians didn't design us originally. It was the Anunnaki, who were human. However, when the reptilians modified us, they did put...
So I thought the Anunnaki were reptilian.
Enki's reptilian. Enlil is a human. The Anunnaki, the most highest Anunnaki, he's human. So Enki's half human, half reptilian. Enlil's fully human. And Ninhursag is half human, half Lionid. There's many of these different species on that one ship. But if you go all the way back to Anu, who's the main human, we are human, because all his children have to be human, part human. The only one that's reptilian is Enki.
That's what I've been more or less trying to get at is
half of it.
Yeah, because there's all, I know there's many different races that are engaging the planet. I have seen a few myself, but the thing that I'm basically trying to get at is if we were genetically created, from the containers that they were in with their intelligence, then how come there's no people on the Earth that look reptilian? I mean,
yep.
There's
Bruce Jenner appearing reptilian, scaring the crap out of everybody, and beat everything.
Besides the YouTube videos of people morphing on camera, I mean that literally look reptilian in nature.
Your entire lymph network in your body is reptilian.
Physically, I mean your physical features.
Okay, physical features. The reptilians, you look at your brain. You've got the reptilian brain, perfect reptilian brain at the base of your brain.
I understand that. I'm talking about physical features.
It's a physical feature. The apes don't have that.
I mean, if you look at somebody and they look like a reptile, a lizard, you know what I mean? Scales, they look like, the way that they're depicted is with tails and a scales and, green skin and a reptile. There's nobody that I've seen that has that. So what I'm saying is wouldn't there be a trace?
God. They were worshipped as gods, and they kept us looking human, from what I understand, so that they would be worshipped as gods since they were different. However, because they did mess with our genetics and add some of the genetics, the longer we grow, the longer we age, the more we start looking like either the reptilian or the Anunnaki. So the skin starts to get hard and scaly like a lizard, the older people. And they grow, some have grown horns. Have you ever seen in the old Chinese men, some of them have grown horns. And even in America, people start growing horns. Some reptilians have horns. So once you get to the 100 years or whatever, and the DNA gets so damaged, it can't cover this up anymore. And so stuff like that's happening. Your hair turning white. The Anunnaki's hair is white.
Okay. Do you want to discuss basically the Galactic Federation and the history of what took place leading up to these events?
Sure. Apparently, the reptilians, we don't know where they came from. Alex Collier He's very well versed on this information, and so is Simon Parks. And they believe that the reptilians were brought to this galaxy and basically dumped here because they were tired of them being on their galaxies. The reptilians they're like a religious order, and it would be a lot like the Muslims in some way with their beliefs are fanatic. They believe they have the right to conquer any world they come upon because of their brute force and power, and subdue any race and do whatever they want to with any race because they are the most perfect beings because their DNA hasn't changed, where our DNA changes. Now, humans, okay, let's call ourselves humans. A human being on this world would look like you and I, but a human world would take on different characteristics because the light from the sun would modify their DNA. You are aware that light from the sun and from the central sun modifies DNA, are you not?
Absolutely.
So each of the species is dependent on what energy comes from the sun and why we all look a little different from all the different worlds. So the reptilians, however, they didn't approach the people directly. They didn't say, you're going to worship me directly. They created a line of kings and priests to serve them. And do you know that the highest of the 7 echelons, the 7 castes of the reptilians, they're white with blue eyes, pretty much, right?
Correct.
Okay, so when they made it with humans, they were lighter skinned, they were white. This was why all the old ancient lines of kings and lines of priests that served them were all white, so that they could create a caste system among the humans and govern accordingly.
Now, how does this tie in with the inner earth and the occupants of the inner earth?
The inner earth are different worlds that came here and got trapped, couldn't get off. Their ships were damaged or whatever. They created civilizations. Some of them were human civilizations that became more advanced, and they just decided to go deep underground because the earth is very unstable on the surface. That's why we keep finding all these civilizations that have been wiped out. And if you follow the work of Graham Hancock, they've been wiped out systematically and periodically every 3,600 years. Every passing of Planet X, those civilizations were wiped out. So under the earth, you don't have the damage from the sun that's damaging your DNA, altering you. Some of these Anunnaki, most of the ones I spoke of, were on Earth way too long, and the sun changed them. And I've heard they cannot go back to Nibiru, which is why most of them are on the moon or on the Earth.
Are you familiar with the Emerald Tablets of Thoth?
Yes, a bit. I've never the whole Emerald Tablet.
Well, I find them extremely credible, and it speaks of, basically the halls of Amenti and the inner earth, and Thoth, has roots in this time period, and these beings and a lot of these ships that we see today, and a lot of the things that are going on in Antarctica and things like that. I believe that there is a race that exists in the inner earth, just as an atom is hollow. Everything is a fractal, and the earth is as well as every other planet. Have you been shown any information on how this civilization ties in with the Anunnaki or with the Nephilim, and what's the connection? Because I know that they were connected to ancient Egypt and Sumer and Atlantis and the civilizations before, and I'm just curious if you've been given any information on the connection.
Well, the connection is they just got fed up with it and created their own breakaway civilization. But before us, there was another human that was created, a different Adam and a different Eve. And they're called the Pre-adamites. And those are the ones that are digging up in Antarctica, the ones with the longer skulls.
Have you been shown anything through your visions or anything on is there anything else you could tell us, or is that pretty much it?
I have insiders that have been to Antarctica, and I cannot share what they shared with me, other than they're going to be releasing some of that information pretty soon. But if you want information on it, David Wilcock is authorized to release a lot of that, so it's Corey Good. These Adamites, Pre-adamites, they're taller for the most part. They have a weird shaped body. They don't look the way you look as a man, as a masculine male. They have a very flat chest, very thin. The shoulders are much more narrow, and the arms are longer. They have a sort of little pot belly. Their hips kind of come out like a girl's, and for some reason they like wearing high heels. But the if you look at the depictions of the pharaoh Akhenaten and his wife Nefertiti, and you know Nefertiti had that real elongated skull, and look at their body shape. Now for Nefertiti, it looks okay. You know, she's a female, small at the top, has a breast, everything looks okay. A little bit of a pot belly, hips are a little bit wide, but you know there are women that look like that. However, if you look at Akhenaten, he looks the same, flat-chested. Something doesn't look right. The torso's longer. There's more vertebrae in there. Anyway, those were the pre-adamites, and that's what they're finding down there. And I'm going to go ahead and give you a real quick history of what I learned happened in the solar system, our solar system here. And you can research it later. You can choose not to believe it. I've been trying to break the information on it and find the evidence for it, and it's all backing up very easily. The whole thing of Planet X, I have seen this object with my eyes. I have photographed the object, and I'm still wondering, is it out there? Mathematically, gravitationally, something's out there. It's pulling on the Earth. It's tilting our axis. It's shifting the poles. But I have not seen it consistently over like every single day. This was like years apart when I actually get to see them and photograph them. So very quickly, the Reptilian War started, I think, 600 million years ago. And during the major wars, the major attack on Lyra, the humans there were the original humans in this galaxy. That's where they actually formed, and from there spread out. Now, they wouldn't have spread out as much had not the reptilians interfered and destroyed their world. Once their world was destroyed, they spread out across the galaxy. And the ship they built, they were more advanced than the reptilians, but they weren't as warlike. So they really weren't prepared to defend themselves. And what they did was they took a sphere, an entire planetoid made of one element, an alloy. And this sounds pretty far-fetched. Is that possible? Okay, well, let's look at the possibility of Dogon stars, Syria, the star of Sirius. They said that the beings from space explained to them that this is 5 suns over there, and how many worlds are on there. They came from there, and they said that they have to celebrate every 50th year on Earth, because every 50th year, Earth year, this one sun orbits the star Sirius. And the entire sun, it's kind of a planet, not really a sun, it's made of the heaviest element in the universe. So the entire planetoid thing is of the heaviest element in the universe. And scientists finally saw it. And it has an orbit around Sirius, by what we can see, of 49.9 Earth years, roughly 50 years. And it would have to be made of the heaviest element in the universe to have the orbit that it has, how close it flies through the elliptical orbit that it has. So this sphere was made of a very rare alloy. They hollowed it out, turned it into a massive starship. The ship is operated, its shields, there's a really high deadly radiation in space. And the heliosphere of the sun protects us from a lot of this radiation, and the Earth's field protects us from the radiation of the sun. Now, to protect themselves from radiation, they use monoatomic gold, and this thing's 4 times the size of Earth, so it's a tremendous amount of gold. And the shield protects them from the radiation of space and propels the ship through space. Now, after one of these massive battles, apparently they were damaged, and they were being irradiated by the radiation from space, from all the different stars. So they took shelter around a brown dwarf, which we call Planet X, and it has its own little heliosphere, not as big, has its own little solar system. So they basically took orbit around that to be protected from radiation, but they were stuck, couldn't leave it for very long. And the reptilians were looking for them. And when they came close to this solar system, our solar system is part of a very ancient galaxy, much older than the Milky Way. It's being absorbed by the Milky Way, being pulled apart and sucked into it and added to the Milky Way. And if you want information on that, go to NASA and Google, or not Google, but search inside of NASA for Sagittarius Dwarf Galaxy. That's what they call our little tiny galaxy, 10,000 times smaller than the Milky Way. And that's why the Milky Way is such a weird angle in the sky. You've got the ecliptic plane, but the Milky Way is at a weird angle because we're kind of coming in at an angle. And the two outer larger planets, according to the Sumerians, this is from the documents, the cuneiforms, they say that the two larger planets captured this brown dwarf as it was coming close to our system. And when it did this, Uranus got pulled off its axis, so it's kind of leaning on its side almost. And Neptune came so close that it lost its moon, which is Pluto, and there's plenty of evidence to prove that Pluto is probably a moon of Neptune. But it also captured a moon from this particular little system, and that moon is Titan, the largest moon that Neptune has. And Neptune's moon, Titan, is the only moon in the entire solar system that orbits opposite the direction of a planet's rotation. So they were here for a long time, and they were stuck because they couldn't find the gold that they needed to repair their ship. And after several 100,000 years, Enki got in trouble over something, and he left the planet and he came to Earth. And there's a book called the Book of Enki, and it talks about where they splashed down in a marshy area in Africa, and they found gold in the water, in the oceans of Earth. And they started extracting it, but it was not enough. And they weren't good. They would take forever to get it out. But it wasn't Earth. The world they landed on was Tiamat. It's the planet just the size of Jupiter. The Tiamat was the size of Saturn, and it was a water world. Well, they found the location in the Abzu, which we know as Africa, that had apparently got hit with an asteroid that was made of gold, and the gold goes down as far as 7 miles. If you look at the work of Michael Tellinger, these caves, the pictures I've seen, they're huge, like hallways, and they go down 7 miles. I'm not aware of any technology that we have to dig down that far or be able to breathe without oxygen tanks that far under the earth. Mile is 5,000 feet, so we're talking what, 35,000 feet under the surface of the earth. And these tunnels were dug out 280,000 years ago. The work done to figure that out, Michael Tellinger shows stones that have what's called patina growth on them. If you break a stone, it sort of starts to get like a rust, the way metal rusts, but it's a growth of patina. It's tiny microbes that protect the rock because it's broken now. And it grows and keeps growing kind of like a scar. Well, you've got patina this thick. That's 280,000 years of patina growth. So these things were built that far back by humans, by our species, the slave species. In the Bible, when Adam is created, our Bible that we're holding, there's a section in there right after the creation. He's still talking about Adam, but he says, oh, by the way, there's some really good gold over here, Adam. What does Adam need gold for? Anyway, that's what Adam was doing. The Adamu was a worker, and he was digging out the gold for the Anunnaki. So they finally got enough gold to repair their ship. And Enlil was done with the program. And the first humans, as I understand it, were androgynous. Where it says in the Bible, male and female, he created them both, they were androgynous. And during this very last pass of Planet X, remember that it was just this large planet. Earth was not in existence. Venus was a moon of this world, as was Mars. There was no Mercury, and there was no asteroid belt. This world orbits where the asteroid belt is. So they're about to leave, and their sun is going to fly in between Jupiter and this planet and the sun. When it did that, it was going to cause a pole shift. Just like our shields are collapsing and our poles are flipping because it's coming where it's coming, that's what was happening to this world. And Enlil ordered no one tell the humans, leave them on the planet. They're the Earthlings, let's call them Earthlings. It's going to basically tilt off its axis. Most of them will be wiped out. They can't reproduce anyway, so no harm, no foul. Because you can't go to another world and build a slave species. You just don't do that. But they didn't have a choice. The reptilians were looking for them. And they had to get the ship back out into the war, and hopefully before they got caught by the reptilians. So that's what was taking place roughly 11,500 years ago. The Anunnaki were ready to leave. Their ships were repaired. They had extra gold and everything, and they were done with the human experiment. So just let them get erased, basically, and everybody's good to go. Right at that point, the reptilians attacked, and they must have timed this very well because there were pyramids all over this world, and these pyramids are special energy weapons. Many people have speculated that, but they need the planet's energy field to produce an energy weapon. And if the shields are collapsing, then those weapons are not useful. Well, that's when they attacked. They used 7 war carriers. To find out what a war carrier is, all you have to do is look at the moon. The moon is the largest of their war carriers. It's a hollowed out or artificially created small planetoid, which carries all their armaments, all their war-making machines. And they had 7 of them. So they attacked with full force. And their ship was damaged badly, but the Nephilim kicked back pretty hard, and they actually captured one of the smaller moons. And at this point, they were ordered, the Anunnaki, who were having to flee, were ordered to destroy Tiamat, the planet on the side of Jupiter, the water world, where Mars and Venus and several other planets were orbiting. So when they destroyed it, I knew they destroyed it. My memories show the destruction of this world, but I didn't understand why would they destroy this world. It made no sense to me at all until I came across something called black goo. And black goo, are you familiar with it here on Earth?
I've heard of it.
It's a nanite, ancient nanite technology.
Yes, yeah, I've heard of it. Go ahead.
It runs along the ley lines of the planet Earth. Well, Earth didn't exist at that time. Earth was part of Tiamat, a piece of it. It was the planet Tiamat, section of it, an island and some water. And that planet, now I have to go to a whole other story so you understand why they destroyed it. Long ago, millions and millions of years back, there was a war with an AI. And the AI in these wars figured out that there were certain beings, didn't matter what species they were, that kept coming back. And let's describe one as Crazy Horse. He's a great leader, charismatic, people follow him. Patton, he's another one. Rommel, another one. Caesar is another one. So these guys, I forget the name of the guy from Braveheart, but they're very charismatic and people follow them. Now, the AI started seeing these patterns reappear. They could kill these individuals, but somehow they were born again. They were in a different body, maybe in a different species, and they had trouble hunting them down again. They kept coming back and creating incredible damage to the AIs who weren't able to defeat them. So the AIs created a prison planet, and it just happened to be Tiamat. They used the what we call black goo. It's an ancient nanite technology, and the reason it lasts so long, this material, these technologies, the screens where you're looking at, the screen I'm looking at, 50 years from now, this will not be operating, will it? Your computer, you will not be able to turn it on and do everything you're doing now. It's just everything will slowly corrode and corrupt and come apart. When they build metal, they don't. When they build anything, they don't build it the way we build it. We dig up something, we mix something up, and we cast it. There it is. It's taken its form. What they do is they find all the missing electrons, pieces to the valence bands of every molecule they're working with. So if you built the thing out of gold, if you built the monitor out of gold, platinum, all the noble elements, it pretty much would last forever, wouldn't it? Well, these metals that they use, all the technology that they work with are grown in this stage, this type of metals, crystalline matrix. So they last forever. So these little nanites last forever. And they run along the ley lines of the planet, and you had a massive AI computer there. You had another one on Mars. Now, Simon Park speaks of the war that took place, but in his mind, the war took place 120,000 years ago. And I understand it's only 12,000 years ago, 1/10 that time. He was part of the mission that came and blew up the one on Mars. And that's where you get all the radiation on Mars and the signatures of atomics having been detonated on it. They needn't have bothered when Nibiru blew up, a huge section of I'll call it Nibiru, I'm sorry. When Tiamat blew up, a huge section of that planet slammed into Mars, and it just ripped the atmosphere off of it. And if you recall the movie Avatar, wherever they're on their planet, it's actually a moon of a much larger world. Well, Mars would have been like where they are on Avatar, and the planet above them, that would have been Tiamat, if you could picture it like that. So when Tiamat was destroyed, a huge section of it broke away, and there were many sections that formed these little planets. You find them out in the outskirts of the solar system because they went out in the wrong direction. Only Earth came to the inner solar system, and immediately once it got away from all the gravity, it formed its own little sphere. Now the writings of the Sumerians state that this happened 450 or 430,000 years ago. However, I know for a fact the moon was not in orbit 12,000 years ago, so it could not have happened that far back. Also, the Earth only has about 12,000 years of erosion on it, and the moon only has about 12,000 years of dust covering it. So all the plate tectonics are still moving, and when they measured the age of the oceans by using core samples, they're about the same age, even though the Atlantic should be a much younger ocean compared to the Pacific. So all the evidence fits that this actually did take place just 12,000 years ago. Now, the moon came with the Earth, and they started, the reptilians loved this life force called Lush, and David Wilcock is the first one I've ever heard name this stuff, so we'll use that word, Lush. Lush is a force, like the force that in Star Wars permeates everything, is life, is everything. Well, when something's dying, it's giving off this force, giving off the energy, bleeding it away. And the reptilians soak it up. It gives them, it's like they can store enough of it, they live longer. It's almost like Stargate Atlantis. If they take enough life energy from enough beings, they get stronger and more powerful and live longer from enough humans. So once they positioned the moon around the Earth, they just left it there. And the Earth started having seasons and having weather and whatever else. And they took the humans who survived, they modified them, and that's kind of where we come from. But the crops that were introduced and the farming that took place would have been taught to man by the reptilians. And where they were farming, because of the flooding from the world forming all over again, a new world, was up in Göbekli Tepe, 14,000, 10,000 feet above sea level. And that's why they're finding all these ancient cities under the oceans that are 2,000 feet underwater, a complete pyramid city down there off of Cuba, because this was part of another world. And during the flood of Noah, Jesus said it would be as in the days of Noah. Well, this Planet X thing came by again, and it's dragging behind it a huge section of this planet. It's just dragging the remnants of a lot of the planet with it. And it states that it's called Satan also in the Bible, the red dragon, Satan, and with a third of its tail dragged the stars. And priests like to say, or ministers, whoever, that this is Satan dragging a third of the angels with his tail. But if you actually go back and read what the wording is written in there in the original Hebrew, it's not angels. Angels are messengers. It's speaking of asteroids, comets, and meteors that are being dragged in the tail. A third of them are being dragged in the tail, a third of them fell to Earth. So when the fountains of the deep open up, the deep is space, and the fountains of the deep opened up, these comets started hitting the Earth, and more water was added. So that's how Earth was kind of created. That's sort of where we came from. The reptilians were in charge. They were having humans sacrificed to them, and then the Nephilim freed them with their weapons, their energy beam weapons, and flood of Noah happened. And then the Exodus happened. And the Exodus was the very last passing of Planet X, from the research I've done and the research many others have done as well. So that brings us up to now. Now, why are we here? Why are we on the planet? Why are so many of us not happy with the way the planet is? And it's because we're not from this world. Most of us have already been ascended masters. And if you follow the work of Dolores Cannon, and this is what really put it all together for me, one individual who I did work with stated, you guys are not here to learn lessons, and like Earth is a school, and you're learning lessons. It's really more like a university, but that's not why we're here. We volunteered to come back because something horrible happened in the future. And I've heard this from Dolores Cannon, I've heard it from other individuals. Nobody knows what this horrible thing is that happened in the future, just that it was horrific. There was going to be tyranny spread across the galaxy for all time in third, fourth, and fifth dimensions. There was nothing they could do to stop it. The enemy had become way too powerful. And all the problems came all back to Earth. Earth was the cause of these problems. Did you have a question? Okay. Have you ever come across, maybe studying something on the Black Death, the bubonic plagues that took place? They said it wasn't Black Death. Whatever's killing these people, the bubonic plague, it wasn't that. Something else was killing them much faster. And some of the reports of these individuals, you know how death is portrayed with a black cloak on, and it's got this sigh, and it's moving it back and forth, or it's going to, a Grim Reaper. Well, these beings that looked like this, they were tall, white, and bony, and they had this thing that looked like a sigh, and it was spreading smoke out. And they were at the edge of the village, just going back and forth like this. And people were dying in the village, so to them, this was death. There were also shields that flew over buildings, spraying mist behind them, and people started dying. This is well recorded and documented. A lot of civilizations took it upon themselves to come back in time and wipe out the humans, the old raid roach trap thing on them or whatever, and save the future that way. And they were stopped because you can't be doing that. The only way to make the changes was to be born human, the way Buddha made the changes, the way Christ made the changes. You have to be born, have your mind completely wiped, and then find your way back, basically. So why did we come back? We were brought back, we were volunteered, and most of us didn't want to come back, but we finally, eventually, every one of us that did agreed to come back. We made the agreement. We said, yes, we're coming back. And we came back because what was going to happen, since most of us were masters, and you had to be a warrior and a master of light, or you would never be permitted to come back. You would not be asked to come back, because only someone who was a master and a warrior of light would be able to enter this much darkness and hope to turn it into any kind of light. We were not supposed to stop the apocalypse. We were just supposed to mitigate the damage from the apocalypse. So people started being born in waves in the 40s and 50s, and they sort of laid up to the 60s, they laid sort of like a beach landing area for the next ones to come in. Now, the next ones didn't necessarily have to be have been born on Earth before. All the ones who came the first time, it was required that you were born on Earth, had many lifetimes on Earth, so you could handle the separation from Creator. Because in every other world, you're automatically connected to Creator like Wi-Fi. Here, we're disconnected on purpose because of the Tower of Babel incident. Humans were modified again further. So once that wave was raised up, and the Loris Canon specifically states some masters who had never been on Earth thought they needed to come here, and many of them committed suicide as children or teenagers. They could not handle it. But they did come in and were successful in the second wave because there wasn't as much darkness. And if you look at the history of Earth, it really was pretty bad back then. As far as marrying someone because you love them, that's a recent transition. That only happened in the last few hundred years, or maybe 100 years, because before then your marriages were arranged, and love had very little to do with the marriage. It was arranged for political reasons, or for the standing in the family. Even Crazy Horse couldn't marry the girl he loved because her parents gave her to another guy who had a little more standing, and they thought they'd be better off giving her to him. Then the next generation that came after them, some of them were not here on Earth before the apocalypse. Some of them were never human, and this is where Dolores Cannon comes in. She was not a psychic. She says she has no special abilities. She just regresses people and helps them, based on past lives, solve problems that they're going through in this life. And what she found out was some of these people are saying, I want to go home. This is not home. I don't know where home is, but I'm not happy here. And this is not the way you're supposed to treat each other. This is not the way our leaders are supposed to be acting. They instinctively know this, but they don't know why they can't put up with the crap that's going on the planet. And they just wanted to go home. And she started realizing when she regressed them, they had never been on Earth before, ever. And she was kind of puzzled by this. Then she found out why these waves were coming in. I was shown what this horrific thing was in the future. It has to do with these blue apples. Because there were millions, hundreds of millions here on Earth, and they were not in the condition we're in. I'll explain to you the timeline. Do you understand timeline changes? You probably do a little. I explained to you that when Obama was elected the first time, people really had hope. And when he was elected that night, things just didn't feel right. There was like an electricity in the air, kind of like a Mandela effect kind of thing. This doesn't feel right. It doesn't seem like we actually pulled it off. And it was just a big joke to them, I suppose. But you cannot give billions of humans hope. You can't energize them and have them happy and believe that there could be a better world for their grandchildren, and actually honestly believe it's possible and not suffer consequences for that. Because what happened, if that many humans aligned and focused on that one thought and believed it, you alter time, you alter reality, you alter the path of humanity, which is exactly what happened. And the Illuminati has never been able to take control of the planet since then. They started losing control right after that. Now, we, the world we were sent back from, the future line we were part of, in that future line, Kennedy was not assassinated. They protected him. And his brother became president after that. Now, Kennedy had a hope and a dream for the Peace Corps. It's not what we see them as. It's kind of like Walt Disney. Walt Disney had a dream of Epcot. He really wanted to build a city, Epcot. But now you go there, it's a tourist attraction with little fascinating things, but it's a tourist attraction. It's not a city. And that's kind of what they did with the Peace Corps. What Kennedy wanted to do was disassemble the war machine that we created, the military-industrial complex, and start using and making things to make the world better. Send in the Peace Corps to drill wells for clean water for these people that don't have to walk 5 miles to get the water, and introduced windmills and generators, things like that, and clinics and schools, build better roads for them. And as they kept doing this across the world, and people were grateful for it, the countries, everybody just kind of came together and said, hey, why don't you just make a one world government and you guys lead it? I mean, you're doing a great job already. So they did that, and under these conditions, the beast had a chance, the Antichrist had a chance to rule the world as a one world leader. And when the apocalypse happened, because we're telepathic, we can transmit perfectly, we just don't pick up so well. Being in this photon field, humans sent out all kinds of terror and horror, despair, shot out in waves across the world, across the galaxy. Human emotions are ramped up way higher than any other species. The reptilians are mostly responsible for that because they wanted to make their super soldiers incredibly loyal, all their little servants incredibly loyal to them. We love so deeply that we can die from a broken heart. Other civilizations don't do that. We can be so terrified we will die of fear. Other civilizations don't do that. They've actually kind of watered down their emotions because they've seen them as not a good thing. So once they disconnected us from Creator during the Tower of Babel incident, when our telepathics were removed, we had a schism, sort of. We were disconnected, and we had abandonment issues, and lies were possible. Now they could lie to us, and we wouldn't know they were lying to us. And we couldn't communicate with each other very well. And the reptilians couldn't communicate very well with humans either. Tower of Babel incident took place because the Anunnaki had already defeated the reptilians. They'd left them here, and they came back to see how the Watchers were faring. The Anunnaki left behind to watch over, like wardens, over the reptilians and humans. And they said, says in the Bible, let's go down, see what they're doing. God wouldn't have to go down and see what they're doing. God would know what they were doing. So they come down here, and the humans are building a Shem to reach to the heavens. And Shem is translated as a tower. But if you read other ancient accounts of that same time, a Shem is the uppermost section of a 3-stage rocket, or let's just call it a multi-stage rocket. But the Shem can leave space and come back and re-enter. So they're building this thing that's going to reach to the stars, reach to the heavens. And they couldn't believe this was taking place. And the Watchers didn't do a thing about it. They started marrying all these human women and just, kind of going along with everything since the reptilians weren't threatening them. And the reptilians were getting ready to get off the planet by using the Shem. And it very specifically states in the Bible, if they remain united, Earthlings, nothing would be impossible for them. We have to separate them. And they separated us with the telepathics of language. And anyway, having done that, I'm sometimes on shows where they say, God, we were created in the image of God. God created us. And you just mentioned that earlier. But God did not create us. The Creator, God, Mother, Father, all that is. In fact, we're the only thing Creator did not create. We are the children of calamity, born of chaos. We were created for selfish reasons. We were modified and remodified. And we, because of our belief that we are separate from each other because of the lack of the telepathics, have embodied something I call the I am presence. I am, meaning like I'm sick of this, I'm tired of this crap, I am angry, I am hungry, I am thirsty, I am tired, or I'm happy. But you have the I am, the awareness that you are, and you have an awareness that you are, and I have an awareness that I'm separate from you and separate from everybody listening, but we're not. That's an illusion. This is what Creator was after all along, trying to create this awareness, this awakening process, where Jesus was the first one, as I understand, to have achieved that. He was the unique Son of God. He's the first one to achieve an awareness awakening from Creator, separation. and a sense that he was independent, even though he was one with Creator. So it's kind of like a drop of water returned to the ocean, but it retains its own awareness, and it won't lose itself in the ocean. And that's what Creator had been after all along. So the ascension process occurred during the that timeline, and this takes us to Prophecy Rock. And I'll try and kind of wrap it up because it's getting kind of long here. But I was shown through the Endara crystal, because you take an Endara crystal and you place it under your pillow, and if you want to order an Endara, it costs about $100 for a 1-ounce stone. Let me get it very quick. It's not what you would think a crystal would look like. That was my meteor that hit the table there. The Endara, like I said, it's a piece of, looks like glass, and it's broken glass is what it looks like. This is the cobalt blue one that I ordered. And when you place these, if you get a really big one, which hopefully one day I'll afford, those have you, the dreams come faster and much more intense. Well, in this vision, they showed me the destruction that happened, why it happened, and that the blue apples were the result of the reptilians getting their hands on a tremendous amount. Because if Kennedy did what he did, both Kennedys, and the world was a much more peaceful place, everybody had more than enough money to do whatever they wanted to, didn't have to work. In other words, you made a really decent salary. Act like when the 50s, when people were thriving, or the roaring 20s, people were happier, and you weren't being fed frankenfood or chloride in your water, or fluoride. Then your brain wouldn't have all these chemicals interfering with the process of these crystals growing in your brain. So when the shockwave hit, the crystals were energized, and there were millions of humans that died. The reptilians love to eat the pituitary gland inside your head. They especially enjoy it when you were afraid when you died, or still alive, terrified actually, because you release all these wonderful chemicals that saute your pituitary gland and give it all these savory sauce. So when they crack your head open, it tastes really good. So they were cracking heads open from all these humans, and they kept finding all these crystals. Then they realized what they were. They put them together, and they had millions of these blue apples. And with these blue apples, which operate the stargates, they were able to move into 4th and 5th dimension. The weapon I was shown was really fascinating. It looked like Han Solo's blaster, which is a replica, sort of the Mauser broom handle, very famous in World War II. The Mauser broom handle has the magazine in front of the pistol. So this magazine, there was nothing in it. It was just a square section. It literally was a square magazine section. And you took the little crystal, which looked kind of like the little jacks you toss when you have the ball and you play the jacks, and you dropped it in there. It would hover because it's magnetic, which surprised me. And then you point it and you pull the trigger, and you don't actually see a projectile go. There's just an instantaneous transition of energy at the other end. It's like the power of God, if you could bottle it, being released instantaneously. It didn't matter if you were an angel or what you were, an entire battle cruiser, you were gone, dismantled at the molecular level on several dimensions. So the reptilians conquered the galaxy. Remember I said we were in shock, and all this energy shot across the galaxy because we were within the photon band, which amplified the energy. Many worlds that had never known war now were at war. So the reptilians, it made it easier for them to come in and clean everything up. Then they created birthing centers. And a birthing center was basically a place where they had a lot of females and certain males for breeding. The rest of the planet was for resources, for worker colonies and things like that. But only, they fixed you so you weren't going to be able to breed. But in these birthing centers where the children were being born, since they were psychic and most of the off-worlders are telepathic, if a child was born that had a very high energy, very powerful spirit, they were just eliminated because they wanted a working class, and that was going to be the future of the galaxy for all time. And there was no way to stop it. So we had to come back and mitigate the damage and give them a fighting chance by lessening the effect of the apocalypse. But what I believe has happened is we're not in the apocalypse. It's never going to happen. The energy, the frequency was raised so high that it didn't take place. Now back to Prophecy Rock. Prophecy Rock shows that on the very top, and this is not the interpretation of Thomas Bianca. They showed me that he was wrong in his interpretation. No one told Thomas what it meant. Thomas found it and he was told to look for it and find the interpretation. And he interpreted it the best he could, but it's not the correct interpretation. The interpretation is that on top, when the ascension happened, when shockwaves struck, humans ascended. And we didn't ascend, and this has been a big mystery to me. Why only humans and why only this world did that take place? And by ascend, I mean you become a light body, but you're also a sort of Jedi. You have all these incredible powers that Christ had, but you also have the powers of the Jedi. And the reason they found out that this took place was that the Pleiadians, they have a special ship made of element 115. Billy Meyer has filmed it. There's some, that you can easily find this on YouTube. But the ship was not created by the Pleiadians. It was given to them by a more advanced race. And it can go through time because of the fact that it is made from element 115. In the future, they came across a galaxy that was incredibly spiritual. And it had these Jedi-like individuals on every planet. And they were teachers and they were masters, just like Christ was. They were Christ-like beings. And they were raising the frequency of the entire galaxy to levels never believed possible. And they guesstimated there had to be at least 6 billion of these individuals, and they couldn't figure out what planet has that many, because most planets only have 500 million, roughly, even a planet the size of Tiamat. And they traced it back in time, trying to find the same timeline, all the way back to our world, our Earth. And it only happened in that one possibility. And we are on that timeline right now. And I believe it's a shockwave that's coming in from the center of the galaxy. Our galaxy, well, I'm calling it ours because we're part of it, the Milky Way galaxy, is a quasar. And this quasar ignites every 26,000 years, creating a great, massive central sun that's almost the size of the galaxy, the light of it. So when they see galaxies, what they found out with the Seyfert, using special cameras that were much more advanced than what had originally been used to detect these quasars, they could not explain what a quasar was. When I was in school, in high school, in the entire science book, there was only one sentence that talked about quasars. And it said they could not understand, science could not understand how a star that big could continue to fuel itself. They didn't tell you how big. They didn't tell you the size of a galaxy. So in these pictures of quasars on the edge of the galaxy, at the edge of the quasar, I'm sorry, this is the edge of the quasar here, and he saw these little, like this, he saw these little fingers sticking out in different locations, like the arms of a galaxy. And they were eventually able to capture one going into transition. The center ignited, and it shot these plumes north and south. So you got a disk, and it shot the plumes perpendicular, and then the shock wave shot across the galaxy from the center all the way to the outside. And our galaxy, they discovered these plumes. They shoot north and south, well, perpendicular to the center, because nothing's supposed to escape a black hole. There's not a black hole at the center. There's energy source. Nothing's supposed to escape the center, yet these two plumes are escaping the center, and they're about 25,000 light years in length. Well, we're about 25,000 light years from the center of the galaxy, and that's what's coming. The shockwave is coming. And when it arrives on Earth, Earth is supposed to transition. Earth is supposed to jump to the next dimension. And on other worlds, all other worlds, where this has happened, the civilizations on them do not fare well. They don't survive it. So usually these civilizations are advanced enough to get off the planet, or other worlds come and help them get off the planet. And on our world, we, of course, were not able to get off the planet. And another thing that I think caused this particular transition to take place is Earth. Earth isn't like any other world out there. I was really shocked when they told me this. This is also when I found out it was only 12,000 years old. But there are no solar systems like ours. Most of the solar systems have really large worlds on them, not the little ones like we have. Mars and Venus were moons of Tiamat. And Mercury is the center of Tiamat, the core. So Mercury is a solid iron core with a little bit of red dust on it. And Mars is covered with red dust because of all the red dust in the explosion. Also, Planet X releases a lot of this red dust as phosphorus. Now, Earth, scientists cannot explain why we have such an explosion of life. And if you've ever been to another world, through meditation or remote viewing, they look kind of deserty-like. And the plants there are pretty much all looking, you have a few species and they just repeat themselves over and over. But not Earth. Earth has an explosion of life. And a lot of that is due to the phosphorus. The phosphorus, the red blood cells we have, the iron in our body. Well, iron is a heavy element. Iron would sink to the center of our world when it was being created. But we have a lot of it on the surface. they've never been able to explain this. Well, every time Planet X has passed by since Earth's creation, it covers it with this red dust. This is mentioned in the Colburn Bibles. That's phosphorus, and they all say that everything appears to be wiped out. It's covered in red dust. There's sky boulders all over the place, and the ocean seems polluted. But then everything just explodes with life, like super fertilizer. So that's one of the things that's causing the life on Earth to thrive. The other is the moon. No world has a moon that large, causing tidal waves on it and storms and weather. Tiamat, it never rained on Tiamat. The levels of oxygen there were 50%. You would live thousands of years. Now, in the ice core, you can go down in the polar cap of Antarctica, pull out the ice core, and you'll see 12,000 years back, we had 50% oxygen. Also, right around that time, we have carbon. Something burned the trees on Earth to produce this carbon. And there's a beautiful documentary. I need to add it to. It's called The Acolyte's Quill. On Facebook, I do not have a web page. I've got too many web pages that weren't updated since 2008. So I didn't want to do that to people who wanted to hear information. I've, on Facebook, created a site called The Acolyte's Quill. I created my own publishing company, but I didn't publish my book through that company. I just really didn't do a whole lot with it. But I like the name, The Acolyte's Quill. And I started posting videos of some of this information there. And there's amazing videos that take you a few days to watch them all. But it deals with all this information and research that I found, so that these individuals get the credit. Now, it is said that the carbon that's trapped in the ice right now, if you had an 18-wheeler full completely with boxes, the entire trailer, 53-foot trailer, full of boxes of loaves of bread, and then you pulled one loaf of bread out of it, held it in your hands, that's how much carbon is on the planet Earth right now. Where did the rest of that carbon, that's all the loaves of bread in the truck that are embedded in the ice in Antarctica, where did that come from? That came from Tiamat. The trees on Tiamat were about 6,000 feet high. And Devil's Tower is the trunk of a tree. It's not a volcano. It's a silicon tree that petrified. And there's examples of this all over the world. These huge columns. And when you look at a tree and you go in there and check out the columns of the trunk, they have these six-sided things with the darker thing in the center, these veins of tree limbs, I guess, the way that the fibers go in the tree. They look exactly like those trees. I had a hard time believing this until I looked at all the evidence, and it appears to be what happened. Those were the trees of Tiamat. It was a beautiful world, much like Avatar. And now we're on Earth, a uniquely new type of world. And if you recall, the Reptilians created a draconian shield around Earth. This was done to prevent the energy from consciousness, from God, sort of short it out and give them all the life energy of the female, the world that was in trauma. And somehow, just like we were awakened by being separated from Creator, Gaia was awakened by being separated from Creator. So she has her own sort of identity, and she sees us as her children, which is one of the reasons the transition took place, and we shifted with her into the higher dimensions. And the catalyst for that is the shockwave that's coming. Also, no fear. You cannot have any fear when that shockwave strikes. That shockwave is pure love. And you've heard people talk about a shockwave, a wave of love coming to Earth. Well, that's what this is. It would be like bottling the power of Creator, pure joy and love, the frequency, the highest frequencies you can imagine. So if you're in fear, you're the exact opposite of those frequencies. And when those frequencies hit, the unstoppable object hits the immovable object, something's going to give, and it's going to be you. So people that are inherently evil won't be there. And Revelation speaks to this. It said in the end is fire, and they refer to fire as anything that gave light, like Elmo's fire. It just gives light. And there are like 45 different words for fire. Anyway, this fire burns away all evil. But it's not a judgment. It's just what it does. And that's about to take place. Now I'm hearing several different timelines, and yours is a lot closer than the one I was looking at. But I believe that's what's about to happen for the Ascension. And I believe your information is very valuable to pieces of the puzzle I've been putting together. And hopefully I've found two other individuals that we can work with to piece all these puzzles together, and hopefully a large picture will take place. Because in the book here, Incredulous, I cover a lot of this stuff, what the teachings of Christ were. Now, the what's fascinating about the word incredulous, that was not the title of the book. It was called A Truth for a Truth and a Lie for a Lie, kind of like a tooth for a tooth and an eye for an eye. So I'd basically be telling the truth with lies. I really liked that title, but the publisher didn't like it. It was too long. Came up with a different one, Where the Truth hyphen Lies. Where the Truth Lies. I like that one, and they like that one. And then I was driving. I'm a commercial driver right now, although I also have a degree in electrical engineering. And this word came up and just kind of hovered in front of me over the highway, over everything. It was very big, and it was in capital letters, just like that. It was red letters. And I'm seriously thinking, I've lost it. I've never seen this before. I looked at my instrumentation, which you're supposed to do, and check my mirrors, and I look it back up, and it's still there. And I'm looking at every individual letter, incredulous. And I kind of know what that means, but what's the actual meaning? When I looked it up, it said, unable or unwilling to believe, beyond your mind's capability to comprehend. And that's pretty much what the book is. And it shows you Jesus was not betrayed. None of the most ancient manuscripts, the oldest ones we have, say he was betrayed, because he was not betrayed. He was not one of the savior gods. But the men who infiltrated the church, Peter and Paul, both warn about him. They say, do not believe them. They say, Jesus was born according to the flesh from the seed of David. That means he's human. And the Shroud of Turin proves that. And the book was written, it was massive. It was 900 pages. And it took me forever to shorten it down and work it so that a normal person on the street would understand what I was talking about. The things that took place. And it's very important you learn what took place because, again, Jesus was guilty. Didn't come to save sinners. He came to give us an example that we are capable of doing. He said, all these things I've done, you will do, and greater things. So we will transition into these light bodies. He came to set an example that it could be done. And the book was then cut into two because it was way too big. And I had reduced it down to like 700-something pages. So it's 385 pages, the first one. And the second one was ready to go, and I was going to release it, and they held me back. Don't release that one yet. Just like this one, I wanted to release it in 2010, August. They held me back, and that's when I found out about the Anunnaki. I knew nothing about the Anunnaki, Planet X, none of that. I had to sort of research it and then prove that the thing's actually there, both mathematically and by observation, which I have. So the book was written to help guide you on the path to, I guess, ascension. And the reason I couldn't finish the last half of the book or release it is because although my conclusions were very, very good, they were a little bit off. And I've been able to fix a lot of that. And with your help, that you gave me, I've been able to hone it even more, fine-tune it to what I believe is what took place. And what helps us is that this has happened before. We came back into the past to recreate it. And we didn't come to recreate it, really. We came to just, like I said, be cannon fodder. But we have gone on that one timeline, the most impossible timelines. And right now the timelines are meshing one with another. You get the Mandela effect. And it looks like we're about to change the entire face of the galaxy, which is why so many ships are here to watch the transition take place. And that's pretty much all I have for tonight. I can keep on going for hours, but I really don't want this to go too long. And I want people to learn in stages, kind of take the first one, okay, and set that aside, and then we'll take on something else the next time. Well, we're Homo luminous, a brand new type of species, the next stage of what. Okay, we are not these bodies. You are not that body. I'm not this body. We're a piece of creator. We're functioning within these bodies, which are rather interesting bodies because of the emotion and the intellect and the intuition and the cleverness of them. Apparently, other worlds, they're not quite so clever or so bright. Humans have a wild imagination, and to write a book, I found out that most authors commit suicide after it's published because they can't relate to the world. You just created a whole world within a world. And it really messes with your mind when you're capable of doing those things, and I can attest to that. What was your question exactly? Okay, Ascension, I have always understood it to be exactly what Christ did, the light body. He accomplished the light body. If he was not the first, over 150,000 documented cases of this throughout Persia, and it was not. Others have attained the light body. It's called the rainbow body. And what David Wilcock has in his source field investigations, the information you can go to and track some of these individuals, but there's, I believe, 150,000 documented cases of people attaining what they call the rainbow body, and it's a light body. To do it, you have to meditate or live a life for 26 years of only thinking pure thoughts of love and kindness, basically what Jesus taught for all 26 years. You cannot get angry, upset, frustrated, or irate. You just start all over again. And these guys were able to do it 26 years. Now, Christ was learning in that area. He was in that part of Persia. I have the tremendous amount of information on that. And he learned what they did, but he was able to do it in 3 days. And Ascension, to me, is acquiring this light body. It's not like the rapture where you're gone, but in a sense, it kind of is like the rapture, because when the energy hits, you're instantaneously shifted to the higher dimension. And this comes from the visions I had, and then once I had them, I also have to go to other individuals who could speak with angels, and we trying to tell them my information, and the angels would agree or disagree. And I wasn't believing it when I was telling it to them, and the angels were agreeing that this is what happened. So then I had to go and find the evidence for it to try and back it up and sustain it in some way, because what I was getting, I was having trouble believing. I saw Planet X and had trouble believing I was seeing what I was seeing and photographing it. So even for me, it was a little bit incredulous. But Ascension, in the scripture, it states that we will surpass the angels. And who are the angels? The angels are the messengers. And who are the messengers? There's these beings in these ships. You and I both know who Michael is. He's supposed to be Ashtar, the leader of that command. Well, messenger is just the word messenger. And these beings are very spiritual. And they are the messengers of God by being the creator, following the orders of creator. So they're the angels. However, we're going to go beyond them. And they're not too pleased with this, from what I'm understanding, because we're too unpredictable. Humans are way too unpredictable, and it actually frightens them that we would have that kind of power at our disposal. Basically, create whatever we wanted to. Christ could turn water to wine. We'll be able to do that. We could be able to grow someone's limb back just by thinking it, because the illusion will be just that. It's like we're on a holodeck on board the ship of the Enterprise. We understand how it works, and we can ask the computer to put this person's arm back on, and it'll be put back on, because it's an illusion, isn't it? And I've been shown some amazing things in this illusion. Places people saw me die in accidents, where in the vehicle I was in, I didn't see me die, and then later they're like, "No, we saw your truck overturn and roll over and basically explode, and white smoke went everywhere." And when we went through the white smoke, you're driving on the highway just perfectly normal. And this is kind of like a reset. I've come across several of these resets where individuals were wiped out, and yet, like the matrix was reset for them, and they're unhurt. I have come across several of these and other individuals who had similar stories, and I've had several of those. So Ascension seems to be something where we already have the awakening, the awareness. When we meditate and we stand before Creator, we retain our unique awareness because we were human, so a residue of humanity, kind of like in Star Trek where Q becomes human, and Picard says, "I hope a residue of humanity has, stuck to Q," and it has. You can see because Q did something he normally would never have done, put the moon back in orbit, and this gives us our, I guess you could call it, consciousness, awareness, separation, a sense of being separate. In the Bible, it always says God, the Creator, because Jesus spoke of the Creator, wanted communion with us, his sons. By sons, I mean both male and female, the energies. There's no male and female out there, you're just energy. And the only way to have a communication is like we're having it. I'll say something and you analyze it, but you don't know what I'm going to say. However, if we're telepathic, as soon as you walk into the room, I'll know everything about you instantaneously. That's how it is in other worlds. That's not communication. That's not conversation. That's just instantaneous download. And we will be able to literally have conversations with Creator and be co-creators. So that to me is Ascension. And I've heard so many other things of Ascension, but this is what I was shown, and this is what I'm being told to follow. And there have been many things the Holy Spirit has actually told me not to do, not to say. There were exorcisms I was told not to conduct. I could see this thing that was in this person. He was a pastor, and I wanted it out of him. And the Holy Spirit was very strict about it. No, he called it into himself. Let him deal with it. I am tired of dealing with him. And I was sitting next to him, and I could feel this thing, and I had to let it go because my orders are stand down. And I'm just trying to be obedient. I released the book because of orders to release it, and I held back the second one by orders to hold it back. Wasn't ready. I wasn't ready. Well, for one, the shockwave from the center of the galaxy. There'll be a second shockwave from the sun. We could get hit with a solar flare blast at any moment. That's been a danger since 2012. And people should be aware of that. They should keep their fuel tanks at 3/4 of a tank. Do not let it get below half a tank, because once power goes out, you're not going to be getting any more fuel. Water will be a main concern. Food, you can get food, or you'll have somebody scrounge it. But water, you can't go for about 3 days, and you're going to be in trouble. And your first good drink of bad water is going to probably be your last one in those conditions, because you're going to get diarrhea and you're going to get even more dehydrated. And if people are preying on other people, you're going to be easy prey. Also, the water filters, there's a very economical one to get. It's sold by Walmart. It's called Mini, M-I-N-I. It's a little tube, not very big, but it actually filters 100,000 gallons of water. And just for immediate purposes, if you didn't manage to get that before we lost power, through a solar flare or through the elite not wanting the RV and the Republic to be reinstated and shut the power off, inside your water heaters, most of them are 30 gallon, 40 gallon. There's a faucet at the very bottom. You can turn that and you've got 30 or 40 gallons of drinkable water there. So these are just little things that you need to be aware of right now, because we're not, as I said, they're not going to give up easy. They're not going to go silently into the night. They don't want to relinquish power, and that's what's about to happen right now. Yeah, one thing you mentioned about the people who weren't too happy about your views of the flat Earth. I found it interesting when I was asked that question the first time, and I wasn't sure how I was going to answer it. But that was the problem they had when they first started coming up with the idea that Earth was not flat, that it could be a sphere, and it was rotating on its axis. Now, the Romans and the Phoenicians were the Romans and the Phoenicians were circumnavigating the globe thousands of years ago. I show in the records in the book how the Romans knew the moon got in the way of the sun to create an eclipse. There was nothing to fear. And Claudius released this 40 years later, because on his birthday, Emperor Claudius, there would be an eclipse, and the army was going to get all freaked out about it. And he sent this mandate out explaining the moon goes around the earth, gets in the way of the sun and the earth, causes a shadow, nothing to worry about, some simple celestial mechanics. So they understood all these things. But in the year 553, Krakatoa went off. It wasn't Krakatoa, it had a different name. Sumatra and Java were one long island shaped like an L with a mountain right there where they both connect. Now, that when the mountain exploded, that was similar to the caldera in Yellowstone, and they created the Strait of Sumatra. So there's two separate islands now. Well, that caldera explosion sent the world into the Dark Ages. In the year 553, this happened. I covered it toward the end of the book. You give the credit to David Keyes. He's the one who was the main journalist who tracked this down. And that's why the entire world was set back. If that hadn't happened, Columbus would have been the first guy landing on the moon 500 years ago. So once right where Krakatoa is now, where it came up and it was just a Strait of Sumatra, that was a mountain back in before the year 553 that connected. It was one long island, and it exploded. It's a caldera. And that information is, they just not released it. They know what it is. It's in all the ring trees on Earth at that time. This happened. And the Earth grew dark for 18 months. At the end of the movie 2012, where all the ships are sailing to the sunset, if Yellowstone goes off, there will be no sunset for 18 months. That black soot will cover everything. And it'll set the world back into the Dark Ages. Any who survive. And so the church survived it because they were taking taxes from all the people. If you were a farmer, they took 10% of your grain. Well, the church had plenty of reserves to survive it. And when they came out of it on the other side, well, who knew the earth was round? People were trying to survive. They were, teachers weren't making it. Warriors and scavengers were making it. So the church decided they were going to recreate the world in their own image, so they would be like gods and they would be revered, and they would run the planet. And so they decided, let's say the Earth is flat, and there's only one way to God, and we're the only ones, the intermediaries, and you can only read it in Latin, and so they controlled everything. So when they tried to figure out, is the Earth flat or not, there were two things that were instrumental. One was that above the equator, you've got the spiraling either hurricanes or tornadoes or the water going down the faucet, all turning in counterclockwise above the equator and clockwise below the equator. That wouldn't be happening on a flat plane. It would all be the same. Also, the pendulum, they took a pendulum up to the, not exactly all the way to the North Pole, but far enough north, and this pendulum continued swinging back and forth, and the Earth rotated underneath it. The pendulum would slowly change all the way around. That was another piece of the evidence that they needed to prove that this was a spherical world that we were on. It was orbiting a sun, and we were rotating on our axis. So I just want to share that with individuals who still might not be sure if we're on a flat planet or not. Okay. Um, mm, Thank you. And again, it's called the Acolyte's Quill, Acolyte, Student of Forbidden Knowledge, ACOLYTE''S, Quill like a pen, QUILL. It's on Facebook, and there's lots of videos there to look at. So, thank you for having me.